you couldn't tell the difference. We're really excited to be here. I want to thank Amy for helping us navigate across the waters, and Brian, who's a board member of the Neighborhood Story Project, for bringing us here. It's a real pleasure to get to hear some of our colleagues from New Orleans and get to hear y'all's responses from Munich. And what we're going to talk about today, Bruce and I have done a lot of projects together, but this is one in particular dedicated to women in healing arts that we did with a group of women healers in New Orleans. The Neighborhood Story Project, for a little background, is a collaborative ethnography organization. So we co-create books and exhibits and public programs with people, usually cultural institutions and grassroots, museums, public schools. And in this case, we did a project with Sula Evans, who is featured in the top photograph. She's an initiated Mamiwata priestess who has a shrine, probably the only one like it in New Orleans in the Ninth Ward. And these are photographs that we worked with the women on to showcase some of their sacred spaces. And Bruce, do you want to talk a little bit about what it was like to photograph them?
Yeah, it's a great pleasure. I'm really, really excited and happy to be here, and I just love being in institutions with scholarly work going on. And this is these things are very daring to all of us here, no doubt. But as a New Orleanian, also it's wonderful to get to see the perspectives and think about just what it looks like from many different viewpoints. The ladies that we photographed was very interesting. I had an idea of photographing them in places that were most important to them in the sense of who they were and what they were representing in terms of the healing arts and environmentally where they wanted to be photographed the most. And so it was a wonderful experience, and they were very, very conscious of who and what they are, and and how they wanted to look. So it's always an interesting process to do that. And I will say there's usually a difference. Like some people were just like, okay, you got me, I'm here, ready, whatever you'd like to do, but not these days. They're like, wait a minute, this is it has to be set up because they wanted to look their best, and and really have a feel, and they understood the kind of historical perspective of what a photograph can do, in terms of being captured and laid out in a certain way. And that was without knowing the full development of the project and how it would look. Also, we didn't know at the time when we first started photographing, but it became very important, and that's usually how projects go. They grow and they have legs, and and they change, and you have to change with the moments and times. And if they have an arc of time that runs through them, lots of things happen very rapidly, and people change and things change as well. So.
We thought it was important because New Orleans, as a city in general, is known for its female leadership around religion in ways that other cities aren't known for. And probably the most iconic woman involved in this is Marie Laveau, who was the voodoo queen of New Orleans, and she's always kind of represented as a singular figure without community, and really without a sense of what the broader connections were. And so this project was about giving voice to contemporary women healers, and like Chris said, being able to have access to some of their sacred spaces in ways that they wanted to be represented, but also to look back in time and to imagine what those other times and places would look like from their point of view, rather than these outside caricatures. The first slide that you're seeing here is a parterre that we created. I guess just one other thing to mention is, like Brian was saying, we created an exhibit based on the ethnography. So some of the images that you're going to see are from the exhibit. And this was a parterre, which is a ceremonial space, an altar that's on the ground. They were organized in the 1800s by women of color, usually free women of color, but who would also invite white women and enslaved women to come and join them, and create these sacred spaces in their homes. The word parterre comes from a formal garden space that's in New Orleans. There used to be pleasure gardens around the French Quarter and along the waterways, and it was creolized by free women of color to be called, the sacred space. And in reports of it, then there's people reminiscing about the accordion and drums that were being played in support of the ceremony. And so Bruce created some music to help us imagine what that was like. So play this ring. Sorry. Do you want to talk a little bit about what kind of music this was, like how the accordion and Creole music became incorporated together in New Orleans?
Yeah. Well, in the historical documents, and speaking about Marie Laveau and other people who had parterres like out on the lakefront and places like that, and police raids and things like that. I really just brought some candles, did some conjure work, to kind of evoke the spirit of what they would likely have done. And I know that they did, use minuets and things like that as part of rhythm along with drums and accordion. And so that's a little bit, kind of fancy cutting edge. Accordions had not been invented and been on the ground that long in New Orleans, but they were using and I would say in a very good way, which I always thought was like a really cool thing. Played accordion in New Orleans because of these types of moments, and so got together with a few members from my Skull and Bone gang, and we laid out those tracks. But I think that in my little divination moment, that they were doing things that were pretty elegant. And they also didn't want to create the wrong element that would bring retribution on them if they could help it. So you gotta have something that's beautiful as well as easy, but serves its purpose.
So in the first section of around voodoo societies, we wanted to create a sense of a salon of what the old city would be like, and to create a space that represented what was, beautiful to the women. There was a whole kind of systematic erasure of women's aesthetics in New Orleans, that is Black women aesthetics, and it was constantly seen as a threat to power structures in the city. And we don't have a lot of time to go into this now, but here you can see Esteban Miro's Edicts of Good Government in 1786, which was controlling the way that free women of color were adorning their bodies and forcing them to cover their hair. This is some examples of the fabric that they used to do the wrapping of the tillon. And you'll see throughout some of the other slides the way that women in the city have continued to use that style as a form of resistance, to reclaim it. This is a little piece of artwork that I created around some of the newspaper articles. They used to report all the time about the voodoo societies. So this wasn't individual women who were creating just altars. They were running full societies. And one of the most powerful is from a trial of a voodoo priestess named Betsy Toledano. I'll just read a minute of it. Betsy Toledano contended with no lack of words or weakness in argument that she had the perfect right to hold the meetings of the Voodoo Society in her house, that the society was a religious institution which had been transmitted to her through her grandmother from the ancient Congo queens, that the performances and incantations, though mysterious, were not immoral. And that was from 1850. So here you can see Barbara Trevine, who's one of the women we worked with, using the tillon fabric in her own portrait that Bruce took. And here she's devoted her life a lot to the archival research on the history of Marie Laveau, and grew up in the community, very connected to her story. So rather than me tell it, we'll just have
Marie Laveau
her talk.
entered the pre-scientific era of less, the international and domestic slave trade, the Civil War, social, civil, religious, and peculiar norms of the day. Barbers by profession and healers cured people of whatever ailed them prior to scientific testing of this. The harmony of healing was in curative properties of herbs, plants, and home compounds. The power of prayer and the intercession of Catholic saints and ancestors were masked as a deity by enslaved people from the African diaspora. And after walking through St. Louis number 1, as though I was a snake in a powder line, finding my way into narrow paths, squeezing between tombs, sitting on tombs, picking leaves off tombs, climbing over tombs, and wondering why tombs were graceless without flowers, with scarred feet. I declared in the air to the common poets of the earth and to the spirits surrounding me that I was playing the story of the widow Paris, Marie Laveau, from birth to the grave, and how she was acknowledged as the most beloved voodoo queen of New Orleans.
Yes, ma'am. So here we're showing one of her most sacred photographs that she's given us permission. This is a photograph of Marie Laveau's grandson, Blair Legendre, and alongside there's 3 photographs, and we're not 100% sure. We put it in the exhibit. Nobody really paid attention to it because it was, it's quite small. It's better to see it like this. But if you look underneath on the bottom one, quite possibly that could be Marie Laveau. That may be the only photograph known of her. And she received that photograph from Blair's wife's sister. So the family connections continue. We don't really know.
It's too much to talk about.
Yes. These are the archival documents that Barbara had been collecting over time, where we were able to kind of get a sense of what Marie Laveau's house would be like. There's was a pomegranate tree, oranges, sassafras. It was in the French Quarter, set back on St. Anne Street, and it doesn't exist anymore. We know that she had relationships, that the house that she lived in for a long time was in her family for over 150 years. Her grandmother bought it out of her own, she bought herself out of slavery, and then she bought that house. And probably because she was a market woman, she had relationship with Choctaw women who were also going to the market, and she would allow them to stay on her property. So again, the sense of community is much wider than what we're typically taught about. And she was also part of a number of benevolent associations, including the Ladies of the Tillon, that were at her own burial. There's documentation. Do you want to speak about the sassy lady here?
She has a T on her head for sure, but this is Louisa Tish, known as Mama Yeye, and she is, of course, an author and has some very well-known books like Jambalaya. When she was growing up, her family lived at the same property site on St. Anne Street in New Orleans, which is, half a block from Place du Congo, from Congo Square at Marie Laveau's same property. And she's a deep wealth of knowledge around Marie Laveau and her lifestyle, as is Barbara, and people in New Orleans are crazy about Marie Laveau and the kind of knowledge and power that she held. So even today, there are scores of women that hold, they hold court, and on the Bullets Bar, and there was 15 women in there having a Marie Laveau ceremony. Wow. So it's interesting, but that's the queen right now, along with Barbara. So Louisa Tish is amazing in what she knows around this, and of course she's well studied and been a university professor also. So these women come in all varieties and methodology, but they all see eye to eye on what good healing arts work is about, and she's well respected around the world for her work with just conjure work in general.
Yeah, and we'll see at the end of the slideshow some of her Oshun ceremony that she did in Congo Square with us. But now we'll just have her read a poem for you.
Old water sprinkled on the floor. St. Michael slays that old demon quiet like behind the front door. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, she cried, come on in here and sit down. Coffee is sipped from a different tax cup in my mama's party time. Don't cross your legs at the table. Beware the cook, but don't eat. Mind your home training for company. Don't you dare sleep that woman's feet. A frizzy is running around outside, scratching up green. Rattlesnake skins and mudbug fins round a blue plate of cornbread. Back yonder, burning barrel, there's salt and rags of flame. Wrapped in red thread up under 9 times, she's with somebody's name. Beyond the fence, things are growing. Cow greens, milkweed, and devil's bread. Sunday morning, she sniffs scorched and cattle. All tonight, white bag on her head. Ask the woman where she's going. A dare to ask her where she's been. You'll find cooling water on the doorstep, and you breathe it, just squeezed by the wind. Being how I'm her daughter, I dared to ask her one time, Mama, you know about voodoo? Child, you must be out of your mind. Who don't hear the death rattle or know how to talk with the law? Common sense is what the law gives you. There's prophecy in the bark of a dog.
In the early 20th century and late 1800s, there was a series of city ordinances that were passed that prohibited fortune telling and other forms of religion that had something to do with prophecy. And so it was a way to curtail the voodoo societies. And I think, Tisha's poem speaks to the way that those kinds of knowledges were incorporated in other ways rather than being as explicit as it was in the 1800s. However, there was also a movement that came just maybe 20 years later that re-evoked a lot of the entertaining of spirits that was happening in the 1800s, and that was through the spiritual church that Ryan was mentioning in his presentation. You can see here, if you look at the transcripts of these small churches that were all over New Orleans in the early 20th century, most of them run by women, you'll hear them preaching in podiums like this that, there's this critique that they're voodoo. And the ones that felt most comfortable in themselves would say things like, but wasn't Jesus called a voodoo? It's like reclaiming that kind of power in the same way as they were doing with the Tillon. Do you want to say anything about about the rise of the spiritual church?
Well, spiritual churches and voodoo in general is like this term I love because it just basically means that's some black shit. So it means that, in American society in general, and especially New Orleans, it's always been the testing ground for all sorts of things, political, social, you name it. They come to New Orleans and try to figure out how to control what's going on there, always have, because it's been considered other, even in academic conferences or it doesn't matter. It's other, but voodoo, that concept is a part of it, and this is a place that has figured out how to negotiate with and get along in the best way it could, and learn how to survive through whatever method it could, and not just follow the norm, but use itself to do that. So, in the spiritual church movement, yes, people they threw everything in the angle of being able to make a better day. And they're thinking about one day survival and then the next and the next and the next. And so using Catholicism and those altars certainly helped to do that, along with Native American spirituality, along with African spirituality, the rise of the Pentecostal movement of sanctified spiritual churches. Baptist churches later reluctantly have to admit that these women are doing some good stuff, and they're mostly, matriarchal places for the most part. And, Baptist preachers were men. So there's a back and forth battle that goes on with what's the best way to get to heaven? Is it only going to be us in this room because we're the special ones? Can't nobody else get in? Or is it you get to heaven any way you can get there? A hook or crook, plane, or am I in heaven already? Because if it is, I'm catching a lot of hell right now. So those spiritual churches, to me, mean all those things, but these elaborate altars that they use and the effort that people put into the intent to create something beautiful, and generally coming from initially from women that were ostracized in so many different ways in society, had a hard time, had a broken family, and have to recreate, continually.
So we'll just go through a few slides from this. There's so many things we could talk about the spiritual church for hours. And you saw this photograph and some of the archaeology that Ryan was doing earlier with Mother Catherine Seals. She was one of the largest movements and a very amazing multiracial congregation. Again, just one short clip from a newspaper article. Her uncanny understanding and complete knowledge of human psychology and mysticism were among her outstanding characteristics. Her grip on her followers was secure and powerful. Her life in passing proved one thing, and most convincingly, that racial barriers are purely and artificial. It was the black-run newspaper, the Louisiana Weekly. And from her church, as well as other offshoots from other congregations like Alifi Anderson's, there's all kinds of other small churches that developed all over the city, and women were ordaining each other, and becoming bishops. So here is St. Anthony Divine Spiritual Temple. It was a photograph that Bruce took of one of the drummers. They would call the bringing in of the spirits, entertaining the spirits, and it all came from drumming. I was just going to skip ahead a little bit. Lydia Guilford, who you see in the photograph, was a bishop of her own church, St. Infant of Prague, but she was a long-term member of St. Anthony before that. And I just wanted to read a little bit about why she decided to leave that membership, which was a very powerful church run by Bishop Hawkins, to start her own church. You see, we want small people to get recognized, you understand? But if you don't even get recognized, you become how can you become somebody? You'll be called somebody, thrown over in that corner. So that's what I've been trying to do, trying to help the small individual, doing what God is telling me to do, and giving them individuals a belief in themselves. You want to speak of Edmoni and Caldwell? I'm also just checking on time because our...
No.
Well, you're saying the timer's on from the beginning of the intros?
It's all right.
Oh.
It's interesting stuff. This is Edmoni Caldwell and Bishop Jackson, who grew up, we saw the photograph of his mother and aunt who were in the spiritual church, and they came out of the previous slide that you were looking at, was photographs of Oscar Washington from St. Anthony Divine Spiritual Church. This is a place that was out on the far edge of the Carrollton area of New Orleans, Calapisa Street. And she went to, yes, that was him. And this is Edmoni Caldwell. She was known as a witch because she used a strong voodoo element in everything she did in her church. And Black Hawk ceremonies, just real briefly, are like the invocation of the spirit of the Native American spirit of Black Hawk. So people call them Black Hawk, and they have regular ceremonies, usually once a month on Friday nights, and they will light up the church, turn out all the lights, and just light it up with candles. And in the case of St. Anthony Divine Spiritual Church, Bishop Hawkins would come down the aisle with a black robe on, dancing and they sing. And they sing songs like Meeting Tonight, like Meeting Tonight, Meeting Tonight, Meeting on the old campground. We have Black Hawk tonight, Black Hawk tonight, Black Hawk on the old campground. So they sing that until the spirit of Black Hawk comes down. And from that point, they do divination for all of the people in the congregation. So when you come up to them, Black Hawk speaks to that person who is holding the spirit or possessed by it, say that, and they give advice and divination about the future or the past or in between for people.
So Edmoni Caldwell is the one who ordained Bishop Jackson, who we worked with on the exhibit. And when he saw a photograph of her for the first time in a long time, he started laughing and said, "She was a powerful leader and a good teacher. Baby, they're still scared of you today." And it was cool to work with him, who came of an era of this very strong female leadership, because the spiritual church is basically collapsed in New Orleans. Now there's only one or two that are functioning, and their congregations are extremely small.
True, there were about 85 before the trip.
Yeah.
85 churches. Fell off the age afterwards.
So one of our goals for this project was just to bring these different communities together. And this is Sula the portrait that Bruce took of her at her shrine in the 9th Ward. We asked her to invite other women in her spiritual community to be part of the project. And at the Neighborhood Story Project, we did a series of public talks and also recorded a night of music. So here on the bottom, you can see Nana Anawa Ntambu, who was initiated as a Yamaya priestess in Cuba, but is born and raised in New Orleans. And she asked Bruce to photograph her by the water, by Lake Pontchartrain, where, Marie Laveau used to have her ceremony there too. And this is a song that we recorded with her. Oh, I'm so sorry.
She is that energy of the Creator that hears your cries. She hears the cries of the world. And when nobody else can hear, feel you, understand, she will. And she's like, as they say, a bomb. Yes. So remember that when you go sit at the water. I came up with my own thing. I used to go sometimes and cry. And then I got, well, ain't nobody gonna mind because there's so much water out here, they're not going to see what they're feeling. You know? It's Mother Mala. She's the nurturing mother. Beautiful mother.
And in our exhibit, we wanted to start to pull the sacred spaces together as well. So this is a collective altar that we made with the women in our project, dedicated to Yamaya, Mami Wata, and the other nurturing, mothering spirits. It's also dedicated to Badarima Roland, who's one of the women we worked with who passed away towards the end of our project of cancer. The night of our opening, this is Badarima, we did a ceremony in honor of her. Do you want to say a few words about Badarima?
She was very amazing, and she came out of a tradition of Baptist churches.
And spiritual churches too.
Well, spiritual churches, yeah. But, at the time of her, she kind of backed off of some things and was moving into others. But her mother also was one of the Mystic Seven Sisters, which was women in New Orleans that had they would do prayer circles and dress in white, and they would go to someone's house when they needed help or anything like that, and they would pray for them either in the house or even outside the house in the street. They would hold ceremonies, but she was pretty amazing in a lot of different ways, and I think we have a small clip from a celebration that was done for her to give her safe passage after she passed away, which was, toward the end of this project that we were creating.
Ballerina was a dancer, and that was many of the women in her dancing community that came together. And finally, just to close out, we wanted to share what, like, the, taking an altar, which is kind of a living entity, and turning it into ceremony. So we invited Yeye to come in January this year. This is a little altar that we created with her for Oshun, who's the Yoruba goddess of love and the river, and to do a ceremony in Congo Square, where there has, traditionally been voodoo ceremonies for many years. This is her in Congo Square, and she walks with a cane. She's like pretty frail, and we were worried about her because of COVID. We're like, and a wheelchair. She's just like not getting around very much. And but as she started to hear the drum, she told everybody to get up and dance, and then she got up and started dancing too. And the spirit of Oshun came over her. In the slide on your left is, she's basically been hit by Oshun, and so she's wiped out for a minute, and then she comes to, and this just looks a completely different person, running around, throwing flowers to everyone as a gift from Oshun. And these are other Oshun priestesses that are following behind her, so in case she collapses, that they'll be able to embrace her. But other people thought that it was like a conga line, so then everybody just started following around, and we were all.
It was a conga line.
It was like a conga line. Yes, and finally, here she is at the end, where she's coming back to herself. So we just felt super privileged to be able to spend a few years doing this project with this amazing group of women, and thank you so much for letting us share it with y'all.
Yeah, you're right.